All right, hello everybody. Welcome to part 4 of the Camper 7.0 build. As you can see, I've been busy in the garage and gotten quite a bit done. I've been releasing a video every Wednesday, um, and at least in some of these initial stages of the camper, a lot's going on. In an effort to keep those videos manageable and not too long, I am going to start doing a live 3 p.m. Pacific, which would be the time of the West Coast of the United States, every Sunday, and then maybe later in the project, maybe every other Sunday. I'll just kind of gauge it depending on how much stuff I'm getting done. All right, guys, welcome to part 4 of the Camper 7.0 build. Let's get right into it. As you guys can see, we've got the front wall. So just for orientation, this wall would be immediately adjacent to the cab of the pickup truck. So this is the front wall here. So what you guys see is I've already sheathed it. I've got the 1/4-inch skin on the outside. The framing has been completed. Um, I only sheathed this because I wanted to try something new out, which I'll talk about later. Not in this video, but later videos. But also it would make it easier because, as you guys can see over here, I am putting together the framing for the composite structure, which will, there we go, the framing for the composite structure, which will be the Cabover section. So it just makes it easier if I have this wall put together before I put all that in place. But it's a great spot for us to move on from here. So let's touch on, I've done videos about these kind of windows installs later, but I'll touch on it real quick here. I don't know what you call this. I just call it a traditional RV window. These are pretty readily available. I think they're expensive for what they are, but when you compare them to other RV windows, they're, you know, mid-level cost or maybe even lower cost compared to some other options. As I talked about in last week's video, I'm going to be putting the acrylic windows on the 2 side windows. Those are the ones that the double pane plastic ones that kind of flip out like this. I really like them so far. We'll see how they turn out, and I'll have one on the door. But I wanted to put a window right here between the pickup truck and the body of the camper. I did that on 6.0 and I really liked it. And so this is where we're at. I'm going to tell you how I arranged where it's at and some of the tips and tricks to how to put this window in. But I want to talk about the importance of this. Obviously, this project is about keeping weight low. One argument could be, reducing some windows. I'm balancing keeping weight low with, keeping some amenities, which I think are necessary. But adding in a window, I think really benefits, even though if it might add a little additional weight. I actually weighed this window. It's only 6 pounds, so that's not too bad. Um, um, but there's an aerodynamic benefit to having this window. Now, um, I'll admit it's anecdotal, but I noticed on 6.0 that what I would do in some cases, assuming it's not raining or bad weather in other regards, is I'd actually open up this window and then I would open up the window in the door. And I noticed it seemed to have a little bit of a benefit. And the best I could gather is, the negative drag that's caused by the vacuum created on the back. If we can fill that gap in with a little bit of air, maybe that's where the benefit came in. I want to make this clear. That's not based on any scientific research. It's just an anecdote from my own experience. So, assuming my anecdote is correct, adding a window here, even if I gain a little bit of additional weight, it perhaps might have some sort of aerodynamic benefit later. This is all outside of all the practical benefits of having a window. So, long story short, I'm going to go with a window in this application. All right. So my pickup truck, and from what I can gather, most modern pickup trucks, if they do have a window in that opens in the rear of the cab, they're going to be center positioned. Okay. Now this window has a screen on this side, so as you can see, the window opens this way. So when I chose the mounting location in here, I had to offset the window a little bit to one side. That way the open portion of the window is in the center, and that way when it lines up to the truck, it will be lined up right there. Okay. Now with this particular window, this is obviously not big enough for a person to crawl through, but you can certainly hand things through. And it provides a nice security ventilation area too, because you got to keep in mind the cab of the pickup truck is here. I always felt comfortable leaving this window open. I mean, there's no real practical way for someone to slide between the cab of the pickup truck and get in. But so how did I do this? So basically what I did is, knowing that the opening for the window in my pickup truck is centered, knowing this is offset, I marked a center line on here, and then I positioned this, the center line of that opening, right in the center line of the width between this camper. And I did that on 6.0. It lined up perfectly, and it should line up perfect here. Let me zoom in, and I'm going to talk about some of the practical aspects of how I framed out this window in a real easy fashion. All right. So if you don't know this trick, and for many of you experienced out here, this might be old news to you, but I'll go ahead and repeat it anyways. This obviously has radiused edges, right? And you've got to, when you cut out your hole, you've got to try to somehow account for that. Well, I found a real easy solution. So basically, I'll just frame it out. Width to width here, width to width, or depth here, height here, width to width here, right? So a simple box frame. But then to account for these radiuses, what I actually did is and this is another side conversation, when you put on the trim ring on the inside, the opening that you have to have is 1.5 inches. So I framed this whole wall out at 1.5 inches thick. After I had made my rectangular size hole, which fits tight around this window, I actually took some leftover scrap I had from that 1.5 inches, and I just cut it at 45s and made little triangles. Okay. And what I found is sometimes you might have to play with it a little bit in terms of the actual size of the triangle, but you can make that triangle just the right size. And in my case, the 1.5 inch thickness of the wall was ideal. So I just took scrap, turned my miter saw at 45 and popped off a couple triangles, tacked them in here. Now, obviously, as you guys can see here, the sheathing went over the top of this, but those triangles close up the gap between that radius and make the install really easy. Because you can see that you've got quite a bit of real estate here on this loop, on this exterior lip here. I've done this once I figured out this trick for myself a while ago. I've done this on all of my campers, and it's worked out well. Another thing to notice, that if you use these windows, is that these have weep holes, and that's how they keep them from leaking. Most of them have weep holes at top and bottom like this. That way you can orientate the window in any direction that you want. Just remember that when you install these are just like little pieces of rubber or plastic or something. Just pull them out. So just like that. Okay. And then, so you guys see the finished product, but you imagine that I had framed it out, and I'll take the camera on the backside here in a moment. I sheathed over the top of it, and this 1/4 inch ply went right over the opening for this window. Once it was all secured and glued in place, I drilled a hole, and I put in, I'm embarrassed, guys, I don't know the exact name of this. I think it's a trim bit, but it's a router bit. It's got a little bearing on it, and you can see, let me make sure this is an angle here. You guys can see that the cutter head portion, okay, is flush with that. So when I drilled the hole in that 1/4 inch ply to the size of or to the width of this this bit, I slid it in, and then this bearing rests on the frame, and then I just zip, 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 and cut around the edge and cut the opening for the window. It actually makes it a really easy install, and it's something to think about. Let's go on the back side, and I'll talk a little bit about framing. All right. So as I mentioned before, most of my framing structure thickness for the rest of the body is 2 1/4 inches thick. I chose that width primarily because it is the exact depth of the insulation that I'll use on the sidewalls. On this front wall, and this is kind of your mileage may vary like thing, but this is what I'm going to do, is that opening the width of the frame structure, the required width of the frame structure, so that when the window's in and the interior trim piece attaches on, is 1.5 inches for these particular windows. So what I did is I went ahead and decided just to go ahead and make this entire wall just 1.5 inches thick. Okay, less material, less weight. This wall is plenty strong enough. Okay, so I'm not worried about that width being an issue. Let's talk about the Cabover. All right, so traditionally, in most Cabovers, I would have had a vertical column right in the corner. Now I touched on this a little bit in the last video. On this one, I had cut those pieces that would allow a little bit of an angle on the front leading edge, put those in place, and stepped the main column back by what ultimately amounted to 7 inches. Okay. Now, this is a bit of an experimental process for me, but I'm pretty excited about it and think it'll work out. What I found makes for an easy construction of the floor, which is the foundation for the Cabover, is to make a composite structure. Essentially, just like I made the floor in this camper. I framed it all out. It will be sheathed with 1/4-inch plywood on both sides, so it will be very similar to that of the tub. The horizontal wings on the tub. In the middle will be the extruded polystyrene foam board insulation, and then that will provide a composite structure. But what will be nice is the entire floor of the Cabover is completely constructed, and then I will install it onto the camper after it's done. Now, historically, most of my campers, I had basically just framed out the Cabover directly off the main frame of the body. In 6.0, I did that composite structure, and it not only made the construction of the frame for the floor of the Cabover easier, but it added and made it a whole lot easier to actually mount it to the camper itself. Okay, so that's why I'm doing it. Now, the thickness of the Cabover floor is only going to be 1 inch. And again, this might be one of those things where if you're building your own, you might want to make it thicker. I had traditionally made the floor structure in all of my other campers at 2 inches. Okay. On this one, I decreased it to 1 inch. My decision-making process was this. When the thickness of the wing structure, which I'm actually sitting on as we speak right now, I made that at 1 inch too. And what I found is I was so impressed with the framing, the double side of the 1/4-inch ply, the XPS insulation, all in combination with being held together with that very specific adhesive that I showed you, that great stuff, construction adhesive. I was so impressed with the strength and the lightweightness of these wings that I decided to extend it to the Cabover floor. Now, there is some benefits to it being light. Less material, less weight, less material, less cost. And a little hidden one is I'm always fighting the height of the Cabover, because in my garage here I have a limit for how tall I can make the campers. And frankly, even if I had more overhead space, I wouldn't make them a lot taller because it adds weight, makes them top heavy. I think it proportionally it makes it a little bit harder to have a nice stylistic feature. But the downside of that is the interior portion of my Cabover area is many times kind of short. So you got to keep in mind that if I make the floor of the Cabover 1 inch as opposed to 2 inches, I'm gaining another inch in the overall space in the Cabover. So it serves a practical functionality in terms of how much you have. Now, a lot of people might say, oh, 1 inch is nothing. Well, that's true. But what I found is 1 inch can make big differences when you're working in small spaces like this. Now, again, your mileage may vary in terms of if you want to do that or not. I'm doing it in mine. It is a somewhat of an experiment, but I feel confident it's going to work out fine based on other factors. Now, there is one big downside, and that's going to be less insulation. And that's I can't really talk my way out of that. There is going to be less insulation. It could perhaps be problematic. But here's my next logic. On the bed, I don't know how you guys are, but there's going to be a mattress. Okay. Now, you could argue all day as to how much R value, the foam I'm using for the particular mattress, and I don't even have that mattress in place. But it would, in and of itself, provide so that the top of the mattress itself is going to provide some level of insulation. So again, we are taking that concept of redundancy, right? Adding addition, the sleeping surface is going to have a piece of foam on there as a mattress anyways. So let's use that extra insulation that provides, cut off some of the insulation here, cut cost, cut weight, and give ourselves more internal dimensions for the Cabover. Again, this is what I'm doing, somewhat experimental. This is the first time I've done this. If you choose to do it, you make your own decision on that. Now, I will, obviously, there could be some condensation issues. Later, I do have some methods in place that I will to kind of help raise that mattress slightly off the main floor of what would be the Cabover to kind of help dissipate any condensation issues if it comes up later. So, and then I'm sorry, I kind of skipped past it, but my final point on this is the new construction method. Let me zoom in over here. All right. So, sorry guys, I was kind of bouncing around a little bit. I was going back and forth talking about how I would normally take this column and it would be sitting right here. Instead, this column is set back 7 inches into the interior of the cab. We have what will provide an angular surface for the leading edge of the corner of this, and we have the wall. Now, there's a couple thought processes. One, having this wall height right here and not having the beam right here is going to make the install very easy, because when I take the full composite structure for what will be the floor of the Cabover, it will rest right on top of here. I will tie it in, of course, with this column, but you will have a massive glue joint. See all of this surface area for the top of that composite structure to attach to, and I'll drive some mechanical fasteners in here too, of course. So that's benefit number one. Benefit number two, again, we're trying to maximize space and usefulness in here. Let me zoom this back out. Okay, so I have become a big fan of this, and again, this is one of those things that you guys may choose not to do if you don't like it. But this east-west sitting area right here that I'm sitting on, right here, will be another sleeping area. Hold on, let me scan this out. Okay, all right. So the final reason why I set the column back and have this wall here, in addition to providing a nice platform for the attachment of the Cabover floor composite structure, is this east-west sitting area, which I'm sitting on right now, will also function as a bed. Now, again, your individual choice to add one of these or not is your choice. Like I talked about in a prior video, you could cut this whole thing out and add a lot more space. I'm adding it because I found it's a nice way to add more sleeping area. And my personal preference is always to sleep in the main cab as opposed to the Cabover. Okay. However, what I found is these side areas will be seating areas. This will be a seating area / bed. This is 27 inches. Well, if you count the frame structure, it's 25.5 inches deep. Okay. If you're using it as a couch area, you only need about 25 of those inches. Or I'm sorry, correction. You only need about 20 of those inches. 20 inches of that space, which is what mirrors these side areas. Okay. So by kicking this in, if I'm sitting in here, I'm not losing any functionality. However, in terms of if I'm using this as a bed area, when the top of the Cabover floor slides in here slightly by that 7 inches, this is tall enough to where if I was sleeping here, I would, just for that, what would ultimately amount to about 5.5 inches of that, there would be a little bit of the bottom of the floor of the Cabover floor on top of me. It's going to be very subtle. I mean, you guys can kind of see just this small little cavity. In my mind, I think it's going to be a non-factor. But overlapping this floor has another benefit. Outside of some structural and ease of construction processes that we talked about, it allows me to get an extra 7 inches of flat horizontal sleeping area in the Cabover without having to make the Cabover longer. I'll talk about it in greater detail later, but there's really some big aerodynamic advantages to not having the Cabover extend over the front portion of the windshield of the truck. All right. Now, there's one final thing here that I'm going to talk about, and that is this height of this wall. Okay, because the height of this wall right here, which is where the Cabover composite structure will rest on and be attached to, defines the height of the Cabover over the cab of the truck. Now, I did something very radical on this build. And again, this may be something that you choose not to do. But based on my experience, I lowered the height of the Cabover, okay, which means that it's going to sit closer to the top of the cab of the pickup truck. Now, I'm basing all of this build off of my Ford F-150. There is slight variation between trucks, but there is other ways to modify this if this were to go on a truck, for example, with a taller cab. But in my case, if my calculations are correct, there will only be about 1.5 inches of gap between the top of my cab and the bottom of the floor of the Cabover structure. Now, traditional wisdom, if you jump on the internets and ask those questions, as they say, you need about 3 to 4 inches to allow for movement of the camper inside of the and the twisting more force between the frame and the mounting points of the bed of the pickup truck onto the truck. That may be a valid point, and this is mostly specifically referring to if you're going off-road. What I've found is most modern pickup trucks, if you look at the top of the cab, they're highest in the middle and they kind of angle out like this. And when I've looked at articulation on my particular truck, and it seems to be across a lot of the modern trucks, is there's less movement between the body of that of the cab and that of the truck bed. So I am taking a mild risk here, which if it does become problematic, there is other ways for me to fix it later just by shimming up the main camper in the cab. But there's no way to make it lower if you make it too tall. So I'm going to keep a really low profile between the floor of the Cabover to that of the top of the cab of the pickup truck. Now, going back to aerodynamics, and this is now this was not anecdotal. I actually was able to average in. I don't know if I talked about it in many videos, but when I had 6.0 on the truck, I initially had it sitting in there higher. I went through and I was able to lower 6.0 into the truck quite a bit. And I noticed like a 2 mile per gallon increase in gas mileage. Plus, it was a lot quieter at freeway speeds in terms of the air going over the truck. My long-winded point is it seems like there was an aerodynamic advantage to getting that Cabover as close to the top of the truck as you can. Okay, now that's a balancing point. I'm going to be doing some other things to try to improve aerodynamics, but from my experiences, if I can keep that Cabover as low to the top of the cab of the pickup truck, it's going to benefit me both aerodynamics, but another factor is it gives me more interior volume of the Cabover. Guys, I hope all of that was clear. And I hope that's helpful to you. As I talked about in last videos and other places throughout my time putting up these videos, I'm telling you what I'm doing and my logic behind it. If you choose to take on this build, you make your own decisions, and that's what's fun about it, right? You don't have to emulate everything I'm doing, of course. That's my rationale, and that's why I'm doing it, and that's based on my own experiences. All right, if you've made it this far, you're probably a very loyal viewer, and I really appreciate you guys watching. Um, so I have not given any weight updates in the last video or two, but I do have a weight approximation for the camper as it stands right now. That's including the tub, all of the framing, and the cabover section. That does not include, of course, a fridge and other tools and various things I have on here. But if you guys want to send out, just like before, just a simple number, your estimates on the weight of the camper as it stands right now, it's going to be a little bit of a harder estimate, I'll admit. Go ahead and just post just a number in the comments like you guys did before. I don't have anything on hand, but I will try to maybe get together a little pocket knife or something that I can mail whoever gets closest. Um, uh, because of cost of shipping things and stuff like that, unfortunately, I'll only be able to mail whoever gets closest who lives in the continental United States. I know I don't have what that is on hand, so you'll just have to trust me on that. But anyways, if you guys want to have a little fun, take a crack at trying to estimate the weight of this camper where it stands right now, just like you did before. Post a number in the comments, and we'll be able to see who's watched to the end. So, but I appreciate all of you guys. I really do, and thank you so much.